Thanks everyone for coming on your lunch hour. Lights. Yeah, George, I think it was last summer, asked me if I would come down and talk a little bit about the business value that Baxter sees in sustainability and a little bit about our history. So I'm going to try to share with you today why Baxter has taken this on, and actually we have done it, as Gary was saying, we've been doing it for many years. And we only have about an hour, so I'm going to give you a brief history of some of the drivers from a business perspective, and then give you a little bit of an insight into how we're trying to drive it within a big corporation, and hopefully have a little time for questions at the end. I'm an engineer and I'm on the corporate level, so I have global responsibility. There's 3 of us that are responsible for environment for Baxter, setting goals, tracking performance all around the world, and trying to find new ways of doing things. As you go into this arena for you start to find that the low-hanging fruit is gone, but there's always new opportunities. And Baxter is far from being sustainable. We have a long way to go. But I'll try to share you from the inside out a little bit about some of the challenges we face and why and how we approach them. So, in case you haven't heard of Baxter before, that would say something good about your life, because we don't sell anything over the counter. We are a manufacturing products, medical products giant. We're not exactly pharma. So where you probably see us is in the hospital. Our largest customers are hospitals and government. We are a Fortune 500 company, and we are a multinational. In fact, 2/3 of our operations are now outside of the United States. Although we are a U.S. company, we are not outsourcing a lot of jobs overseas. What we're doing is meeting population trends overseas. So where the population is growing, that's where we're growing. But we haven't shipped jobs out of the U.S. market overseas. We do have a local presence in more than 110 countries. And you can see here, we have a heavy concentration in Europe, U.S. These are just our manufacturing facilities. Products, what we make, we have medication delivery, renal, and bioscience. Renal, we're very well known for kidney dialysis machines. Baxter invented peritoneal dialysis, for example. Medication delivery, this is where we're the largest maker of IV bags in the world. So this is where you're likely to see us if you're in the hospital or somebody you love is in the hospital. Bioscience, a lot of Factor VIII for hemophiliacs, and a lot of blood products, vaccines, other things. We have the avian flu vaccine, for example, you might have heard about, that is non-egg based. That would come out of a bioscience division. But you can see the kinds of things that we do. A lot of plastics extrusion, a lot of molding, filling, sterilization, very energy intensive, very resource intensive, and lots of warehouse and distribution, so a lot of transporting things all over the world, R&D, packaging. Now, what we try to do at Baxter, like most big corporations, is we go through a strategic planning cycle every year. We try to start with our strategic challenges. We try to sit back and take some time and say, what do we need to do? And you go through this cycle. A lot of companies have some form of this where you're actually trying to drive results and then get some feedback, and it becomes a loop into trying to have some continual improvement process. But we start with strategic challenges. So what are some of the strategic challenges that Baxter's facing that we talk about? The one I'm going to throw out here that is really critical to us these days, which should come as no surprise to you, is global energy. And when the demand for energy worldwide is rising rapidly, and most economies are fundamentally fossil fuel based, and we have climate change issues as well, but we have seen this challenge for a long time. It comes up every year, and what we're seeing is we started long ago trying to get more energy efficient because of this, and you can see our world usage has remained relatively flat. But when we adjust for production, imagine we've gotten more efficient, but look at our cost. Even though we've stayed relatively flat worldwide, look at the cost numbers. Now imagine what this means for a corporation. A lot of corporations are seeing this. We know that the cost of energy is going to continue to rise. We know the cost of water is rising. We know the cost of raw materials will continue to rise. The cost of transportation will continue to rise. And that material and resource efficiency will give us a competitive advantage and also help us be sustainable into the future. So the key strategic challenges that we see, increasing population and consumption around the world. Think about this. To 1930, which is the whole human history, we built up to 2 billion people. And then 60 years later, we've tripled it to 6 billion people. The population curve is growing phenomenally. And think about what that means to a global company and one that makes healthcare things. We see this trend. 3 people are added to the world every second when you balance world birth and death rates. We're talking about another billion people, which is the equivalent of another China in 10 years. And potentially double the population growth to 12 billion people if we continue this rate by 2050. Now, some who have looked at carrying capacities of the Earth are talking maybe 15 billion, and here we're looking at potentially 12 billion by 2050. And 96% of this growth is happening in emerging economies. One of the reasons why Baxter and other multinationals are expanding a lot in China, India, other places, expanding population. At the same time, we see this trend of decreasing natural resources. According to Shell Oil, we've got roughly 42 to 44 years of oil left at world consumption rates that are now. This is no reserves. But if you think about oil, it doesn't matter. Because if you start doing the math, we're increasing usage at roughly 4.5% to 5% every year. If you think about your exponential mathematics, it doesn't matter if there's 42 years, it doesn't matter if there's 100 years, 10,000 years. If you continue to increase demand at 5% a year, you have 10,000 years of oil, it's only going to last for 125 years. It's a losing game. Something has got to change. Either the exponential growth curve needs to change, or the increasing demand curve needs to change, or we have to find something else. It's a losing game. It doesn't matter 42 years. If you're wrong, 1,000 years or 10,000 years. Water shortages. Baxter makes IV bags. We put water in bags. Critical to our operations. We're already seeing water pressures in many parts of the world. In India, in northern China. Northern China, our plant has to keep drilling deeper wells because the water table is dropping so fast there. So we've already starting to see this quite significant. We're also getting more dust in our plant in northern China, which is important for our product and quality. We're looking at critical water shortages coming up, which is important to us. Half the world's forests were lost over the last 40 years. We look at forests as being sources for new, potentially new drugs. This is a concern to us. It's even a bigger concern to big pharma. We're not exactly pharma, but we work a lot with pharma. And the U.S., and you've probably seen this before, we've only got 4.7% of the population. It's currently using roughly 25% of the resources. So you start to think, 4.5% of the world's population or so. Can China ever have our life and do it the way we're doing it now? And India and the rest of the world? If they have 5 times as much the population, it's not going to work. So something needs to change. In fact, I was looking at some statistics, and they said if China continues down the road we're going, then by 2030, they're going to need roughly 99 million barrels of oil a day, if they're as inefficient as we are. Well, right now, world production rates of oil is 79 million barrels a day. So they're growing their demand so fast. So anyway, this is a trend we see. We see this increasing population consumption, decreasing natural resources. We call this the big squeeze. Bill Blackbird's going to come and talk next. He used to be at Baxter. This goes back to his days when he was at Baxter. We used to talk about this. Look what's happening. Look what's happening across the world. And what happens if this continues? So other global business trends that Baxter sees, and we talk about global cost competition, growing influence of environmental education. The EPA was only started in 1970. And if you believe that what you learn when you're a kid, you go to the schools now, they're talking so much about environment. And you have a whole new range of environmentally conscious consumers coming up. And some of them are becoming CEOs now, too, who started learning about these things in school. They talk about it in school. Growing importance of reputation and branding with the information flow. And bad news travels very quickly. I'm sure many of you have heard about heparin issues. You know, this is just massively fast. Bad news travels fast, and our reputation is very critical to many things, such as new talent, global competition for new talent. People want to work for good companies. The demand for transparency of corporations. We have, again, bad news. When you see companies that get in trouble, it's usually not for what they did, but it's for what they tried to cover. It doesn't work anymore. So transparency, when Baxter started out with our first environmental report, the person who did it, who's now retired, it was very early on, said, if nothing else, I want our report to be the most honest report in the world. And that was in the early 90s. And, you know, when we go back and think about it now, how much foresight she had, because now there's a huge demand for that. The growth of NGOs, non-governmental organizations, Sierra Clubs, Greenpeace, if the government backs off on regulation, these are becoming a new regulatory body where they actually come in and bring lawsuits against companies who don't pay. So, yeah, producer responsibility laws, social activism, all this are trends that we have to deal with. So what are the consequences for business? And how is business addressing these trends? I can tell you from inside Baxter how we're trying to address some of these trends. One, we talk about sustainable development. So if you're here, you've probably heard about sustainability. I'm hearing it 5 years ago. I hardly heard it. It was just starting to be in the lexicon. Now people are talking about it all the time, and in business especially. It's become very big. And people have different definitions of it. And it's kind of a hard concept to grasp. If you think about it, there's like this definition, a business approach to create long-term shareholder value by embracing opportunity and managing risk deriving from economic, environmental, and social development. That's the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. And yeah, that might be one way to define it, but it's not a very easy one to use in a corporation because it doesn't really pass the hallway test very well when you're trying to get people to understand what we're talking about. Baxter tends to go back to the original United Nations Brundtland Commission, which is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. This is a very common definition, but to me, personally, it doesn't really do a whole lot to explain what it is. I mean, when you think about that for a few minutes, you're like, well, what do future generations need? I mean, what does that mean? You know, does everyone need a Hummer? Does everybody, you know, I mean, how would you define that? So, I mean, it's a way to sort of subjectively get your mind wrapped around this concept, but it really is, the more you think about the future and the trends of the future, the more confusing it really can become. So, and you can think about sustainability for a city, you could think about it for a corporation, you could think about it for a state, for a country, you can think about it for a world. But in business, we tend to try to go back to put boundaries around it to make it more manageable. And the way we've done that at Baxter is to talk about this thing called the triple bottom line. It's very useful for business to think about because you talk about, well, we've got economy or profitability. Think about sustainability, meaning I can go out into the future and be healthy and keep doing what I'm doing, maybe. In order to survive, I'm going to need to be profitable. And this is the bottom line that everybody talks about in business. But we need a triple bottom line, which means social responsibility as well. Because if you don't treat your employees well, you don't treat your communities well, you hear stories about Nike and child labor issues and all of these issues. That is responsible to keep the corporation healthy as well. And then we talk about the third one, environment. Clearly, if you use up all the resources you're going to need for the future, if you pile toxins and waste around you, create an unhealthy environment, you're not going to be very healthy either. So we talk about trying to balance all these things. And what you try to do in business is you try to think, well, it's a coaching for management to say, sustainability doesn't mean, oh, we're going to go over and do some, clean up the beach day. We try to think of, well, how are we going to balance this with profitability, environment, social responsibility? Let's try to come up with a triple win. So maybe instead of maybe we will clean up the beach, and we've done that before, because water is important to us, and in the Philippines, that's one of the jobs that one of our plants did, which is great. But maybe we need to think about access to healthcare, because we're a healthcare company. And maybe we need to think about how can we donate products to help developing communities and make our products more environmentally responsible. Maybe we can make a solar-powered dialysis pump that could be used in Africa. And that's what we need to, focus our attention on, getting this triple win. And then it becomes a little more complicated. But it also brings more people into the picture. So you're getting deeper in, but you're also hopefully coming up with a big win. So that's what we try to do. So some of our key learnings at Baxter that I can share with you over the years that we've come to understand about sustainability. First, and probably most important, these trends that I was talking about are real. Okay, this is what the world looks like. We've got this decreasing resources and increasing consumption funnel or squeeze. It's real. We decided long ago that we had a choice. We could either recognize that and try to strategically manage our way through this funnel, or we could wait to get bounced down. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, I've been using this slide, I think since as long as I've known Tim. and when we were first learning ourselves about sustainability, back in '92 is when we, and when I started at Baxter, this slide goes back to '99 at least. And I used to say, when I use this internally, I'd say, we can wait until the price of oil goes up to $100 a barrel and get jerked around by the high cost of energy. And look where we are. Today it's $107 a barrel. And, this is what we were seeing long ago. We said, we can try to be more resource effective now and not get bounced around by just responding to the trends. We can try to early on adjust ourselves. The second thing we understand at Baxter is that there is an economic transformation going on globally. And if you think about it, it's got to happen. Look at this linear model. This is how most companies, including Baxter, operate. We get raw materials and we make products that people use, and then we have waste. And it's very linear for the most part. And we know that this is going to have to change to a closed, cyclical model, because you just can't do that forever. When you pass that by a 5-year-old, asking how long can you do that? It's easy to see it can't go on like that forever. So people talk about someday we're going to have to mine landfills or something. It's going to come from figuring out how to do what we do a little bit differently. And what we see, and this comes from Hunter Lovins, she and I gave a panel presentation in Chicago this year. And I don't know how many of you have heard of her, but she's gone out a hero for the environment and natural capitalism, talking about an institute and all of that. But think about the first industrial revolution. People were scarce and resources were abundant. So what do you want to do? You want to increase labor productivity because you don't have that many people. So the whole first industrial revolution, where everybody thought resources were endless, I mean, nobody was worried about resources. What they wanted to do was get more product out. So, Ford and the whole production line was to increase productivity, and we saw a productivity increase of 100-fold during that time of creating new products. And so you tax the use of people, you tax labor, and you subsidize the use of resources, and everything is great. Well, what we're seeing now is a flip. What we're starting to see with those trends I showed you, where people are now becoming abundant, resources being scarce. So now what you want to do is increase your resource productivity. So rather than increasing labor productivity, you need to maybe have 4 or 10 or even 100 times the productivity of resources for each unit of resource, and make better products, maybe more services, other things. So ensuring that efficient use of resources is going to be the key in the next industrial revolution. And you look at this statistic: materials mobilized in the economy, put into products, and still there 6 months after sale, 1%. There is global waste, 500 billion tons every year. That's a huge business opportunity. Some of you might have seen this, which we've also talked about, the next wave. I mean, imagine, you see these waves happening faster and faster as mankind has developed since the industrial age. And you look at, the 5th wave being, the information age, and now we're in the 6th wave, we believe, which is inevitable. Okay, now wouldn't you have liked to have known when Bill Gates was still tinkering around with stuff that was coming? So I want to ask you, when Bill Gates is in the wheelchair, who is going to be the next Fortune 50? We believe it's going to be the people that figure this stuff out, that figure out how to close these loops, that figure out how to do this resource conservation, really, and figure out how to do what we're doing very differently. That's going to take some real creative thinking. But maybe it's the guy who's sitting in his basement right now figuring out how to use a wagon. So the third thing that we understand at Baxter and believe at Baxter is that this transformation that we're seeing from the linear to the cyclical economy is increasingly being led by CEOs and executives. Bob Parkinson at Baxter is a huge advocate of sustainability because he sees the global picture. And he sees the resource problems in China. He sees what's going on in India. And he sees the opportunities as well. So it's particularly strong in multinationals, but you can see small companies also really coming on board. There is a huge tipping point when you're talking business now. And people are like, I want to learn now. How do I save energy? How do I save waste? How do I save water? Blah, blah, blah. And suddenly they're starting to really get it. And there's a huge wave happening right now. So, one of these survey reports down here, the larger and more highly visible company, the more likely it is to be developing sustainability programs. I know that CEOs are talking to each other about these things. That's how our former CEO, Harry Kramer, first learned about a lot of these things, was in Davos, Switzerland, at the World Economic Forum. And now Parkinson, when he started at Baxter, he held up a sustainability report. He falls down the first week. He was there. And he said, I know Baxter's the leader. I knew because I was at Abbott and we were watching Baxter. But he said, but we know you're a leader. And he said, and I just want you to know, I want us to do even better at this because I think this is the future. And another reason why the CEOs are really on board with a lot of this is because a lot of customers are demanding it. For us, customers meaning the hospitals are getting very sophisticated. They want to do the right thing. They're asking and demanding of their suppliers, meaning us, to be more sustainable, develop more sustainable products. Here's an example of the kind of thing that's going on. CleanMed, this huge conference for hospitals where they talk about greening the environment. And we've attended Clean Med before, and you look at this, environmentally preferable products. So, this is on our radar screen. We've got Premier. Premier is a huge GPO, group purchasing organization, one of Baxter's largest customers, and they're talking about environmentally preferable purchasing. Now, that's good for us that work in the environmental health and safety departments, because we can take these things to marketing and say, look, this is important for Baxter to work on, helps us, but they're serious about it. Clean Med in 2005, and there's going to be, they do this every couple of years, in this year, Clean Med conference, there was 5 group purchasing organizations at a plenary session. These guys are $50 billion worth of purchasing power, huge, representing over 9,000 U.S. hospitals, and things they were talking about, no PVC, DEHP, that's some of the plastics that we use. And they were talking about environmentally preferable purchasing is here to stay. And so we have gotten our marketing people to go to this. They're starting to understand this. And of course, that all goes up to the president of medication delivery. It goes up to our head CEO. He cares about what the customers are going to buy. And that's all helping to drive our program. We also understand that besides the customers and the CEOs and everybody else driving it, regulations are also driving it. So you've got a lot of regulations overseas, European pension fund laws. They have to screen companies that they're going to buy stock in to make sure they're socially and environmentally responsible. We've got European take-back laws. For example, in Germany, Baxter has to pay over $1 million. It's correlated sort of as a tax on all of the cartons that we put on the market. We have to track how much cardboard cartons we put on that are carrying our product, and then we have to pay a tax which supports a program called Green Dot, which collects all these cartons and recycles them. That is spreading throughout Europe, and we're having to do that. So what is it? What's the incentive then to Baxter? Well, we come back and we say, well, we're taxed by weight, so maybe we need to lightweight our cartons a little bit, or figure out ways to package in less stuff, right? Get the product to the customer with less packaging material. That kind of thing is also starting to happen in some of the U.S. states. You get electronic equipment, waste electronic and electrical equipment in Europe. We have to actually, same thing, pay schemes to take back our pumps, our dialysis machine, to have them recycled. Well, that drives innovation on our side, because we have to figure out how to design things that are better and easier to recycle. But it's all putting the onus back on the producer to take care of end of life. This is relatively new. Manufacturers used to be able to just make something and put it on the market, forget about it. Now we're being called to the carpet and saying, you need to design this in a way that is going to be responsible at end of life as well. And that's becoming part of our strategy now. So, and it's being driven a lot by these regulations. Now, a lot of U.S. states are starting to adopt these things too. I think California has something in the works right now for computers. And they're going back to the Dells of the world and Hewlett Packards, and they're saying, you are going to pay the tax to get all this electronic equipment back. Washington State has a few things, Oregon. So it's really starting on the West Coast, but I know Massachusetts has some things going as well. This is influencing business. And then you've got clean production laws in China. China is passing laws so fast as they realize they can do it. It's interesting to watch and try to figure out what's going on, but they're copying a lot of the European requirements on restrictions of hazardous substances and other things like that. So, and really what we're seeing is this general transformation from more services and less stuff. So, really what we're talking about is sustainable development really means sustainable business, especially for a global corporation. You need to understand these trends and you need to respond to them. So some of the value that we expect to get from having a sustainability program and really going after this, our reputation, I showed you how the customers care about it, market share, talent attraction and retention, very important these days in corporations. We're looking for the brightest guys. Any good students here? We're always looking for the best students. We always need help. And we're always looking to attract as many bright minds as we can. And they want to work for better corporations. There's Harvard Business School studies coming out about how there is a direct correlation. Attracting capital investors, so that's socially responsible investors. Baxter sees that quite a bit. And support for international expansion. When we expand overseas, if they know we have a good reputation, they're more likely to open the door. And when we get to the next part, I'll show you some actual examples that Baxter has experienced. So this is some of the things we've seen. Reduction of risk. You have less waste, you have less risk. You have less pollution, you have less risk. You start to buy renewable energy that's less likely to experience the spikes of oil and other things. That's less risk. All kinds of reduction of risk. Your ability to drive innovation and growth, new kinds of products, and I'll show you in a minute how you've seen that come to bear. And financial performance. There's all these things on the environmental waste means money. So really, sustainability does pay. There's a new report you might want to look up from Goldman Sachs, July 5th through 6th. It's when they released it. Companies considered leaders in environmental, social, and governance policies are leading the pack in stock performance by an average of 25%. 72% of the companies on the list outperform their industry peers. And you can see here in Invest Group, what they did was look at the forest and paper product sectors. Innovest is a socially responsible investor. They actually come and talk to Baxter quite a bit. And these investors come in a group. They ask us all kinds of questions before, and they really grill us before they decide whether they're going to invest in us or not. They want to make sure that what we're saying in the outside world and our sustainability report and all is true. So they really do rip companies apart and try to see what's really going on. So, and this is one of the reasons. I mean, here you've got the change in total return of environmental leaders versus laggards in the forest and paper product sectors. And you see the green line is the leaders, the brown line is the laggards, based on the criteria that Innovest developed, and the blue line is, the blue part is the difference. Now, they did the same thing with the utility sector. As you see, the leaders in the utility sector, what's really interesting, I think, and I'm not sure why this is, but you see the difference growing as the years are going on with the utility sector. The leaders versus the laggards. And this blue is showing you the difference. So this is one thing, to show that it really, you could debate, well, is it that the leaders are actually putting more in? But the general consensus seems to be that the leaders are probably managing this well because they're also managing other things well. So, anyway, at Baxter, our program has evolved. We started out with regulations, just trying to figure out what the environmental regulations were in the 70s. Through risk reduction in the 80s, this was super fun, time where we were worried about pollution, Love Canal, all those things were happening then. We went into ISO management systems. This is when we really started to understand. We started our public reporting in the 90s, setting goals and tracking our performance. That is key for any company. You've got to understand what your aspects are. You've got to understand what you're doing well, what you're not doing well, because you're going to have limited resources, and you want to make sure you're taking those resources and applying them in the best way. So it was really during the 90s that we had a big push to do that. And then, but lately in the 2000s, and lately we've been seeing huge leaps in the sustainability area. And this involves a lot deeper integration into the business, into all aspects of the business, including product development, including our supply chain, We're integrating with manufacturing tools like Lean and Six Sigma. And in order to really make this work, you have to get into every area of the business. It's no longer the environmental group over here doing things. It's just not going to work. So this is a history of our program. The major milestones that you can see. We really started early on. But you'll also see that one thing that's driven us over the years is different public things that come out, like CNN report. We had a major merger year, and really a lot of things were dropped in those days, but then this report comes on the news, and suddenly the program is rejuvenated. We issued our first internal environmental report to try to show Baxter management what the value was to reducing waste back in the early 90s. And then shortly after that was the first public environmental report. It was, I think, in the mid-90s, 1995, when we were chosen as the best environmental report in the world by the United Nations. Very transparent, but it was data-based, data-driven. And, but as we go here, things are starting to happen faster and faster. Milestones are happening faster. And we've got this new sustainability steering committee. We've got carbon neutral headquarters, and I'll talk about that in more detail in a minute. So this has been general evolution for a long time, but our general approach at Baxter and how we drive this and continue to drive this, these are the most important components. Number one is communication across the organization, and it really does come from our CEO, ultimately. So we get key messages from him. People say this, but it's really true. You have to have the top guy understanding this. Multinationals are understanding it. A lot of them are. Not all of them, but a lot of them are. And, this is something he said when he was there the first time he spoke to all the employees. And I wrote this down because I thought this was really interesting. He talked about sustainability. And he said, 20 years ago, we really believed that profitability and quality were separate issues. He said that is just inconceivable now. There's a strong correlation between the quality and profit. He said he believes that in the next 20 years, any disconnect between environmental responsibility, social responsibility, and profit will be similarly inconceivable. He said people will no longer be thinking of these as separate things. This has to become, and he really, so I wrote that down. That's word for word what he said. So his message to the general employee population is this is important. And Ceres, which is the Coalition for Environmentally Responsible Economies, this is a collection of socially responsible investors, non-government organizations like Sierra Club, Greenpeace, and companies. Baxter's been a member of Ceres for many years. We get a lot of feedback from them, and we listen to them and we say, what should we be doing? Anyway, our new CEO, Bob Parkinson, was a keynote speaker at the Ceres conference, and he decided at that time to announce that our corporate headquarters were going carbon neutral. So it was nice of him to say that. What's interesting is we already had a couple of manufacturing plants that had already gone carbon neutral. But this was where Parkinson lived. So when he started talking about it, it was really, and that's one thing I've learned working in a corporation. If you really want your executives on board, get them a big speaking engagement. Because then they have to learn about it and speak about it. And it's one of the best techniques for getting them to understand the issues in a deep way. Because then, they need to understand somebody asking questions, And most of these guys are workaholics, so they're going to really try to know everything. So, the second thing, besides communication, is accountability and involvement. And to take our program to the next level, what we've recently created is a sustainability steering committee. This includes executives from multiple functions across Baxter. Again, not just a speaking engagement, but giving them something to do. It has to come from the top guy. They report back to Bob Parkinson and his team. They're tasked with setting company-wide goals on sustainability. Now, in order to do that, they have to learn about it. And so you look at who's on this team. I mean, you've got all these vice presidents. You've got president of medication delivery. You've got vice president of supply chain. And you've got R&D guys here, technology resources, talent, the HR guys. So, and manufacturing guys. And they have to do it. So they have to decide, what's Baxter going to do to get to the next level in sustainability? So you put them in a room, start, bringing a facilitator. They have to learn about it. It's a great way to get these guys involved. They have to. And suddenly they start to get a deeper understanding. So we had somebody come in and meet with these guys and talk about the bottom of the pyramid and business opportunities and resource intensity and things like that. And out of that, they came up with 9 buckets or 9 general goals together that they felt would bring Baxter to the next level. Each of these 9 priorities was assigned a leader, a vice president, to lead the team, and a small team. So this is where I sit in a couple of these teams, and the teams are responsible for fleshing out actual goals and actual metrics. And we all come back together, and the company decides how to go forward. So that's what we're in the middle of right now. And in June, we're going to announce our goals. But what an effective way to get people involved. Give them something to do, tell them they have to learn about it. And it's working. And for the first time, I think we're going to really be coming up with something we've struggled with, the social responsibility metrics. They are going to have to decide what are the metrics going to be around access to health care. Because you're going to have to come up with a goal. So you're going to have to figure out a way to track the goal and on performance of the goal, what would be a viable metric for that? And other things. So this is getting people to think about it and including it in the corporate strategy. The third critical part of our structure and our drive to sustainability has to do with setting goals and measuring progress. And this is one thing Baxter has been known for years. I mean, we've been tracking the heck out of everything. And this started long before my time, developing systems to, again, understand what are your impacts, what do I need to be doing about the impacts, am I making progress, am I not making progress, what's working, what's not working, where am I going to apply my limited resources. So you've got these goals, and each year, and you can see data. If you're a data freak, you can see tons of data in our sustainability report, which is here, Baxter.com/sustainability. We have so much information in there. And this is just a snapshot of how we're starting to track it by the spiderweb kind of system, when we start at 100% on all of these, and then see how we're doing. It just happens that last year we didn't do very well on waste, and so we're putting a lot of resources on it this year. And we actually didn't do much better this year either, so we're actually putting more resources in it. But you can see environmental incidents, greenhouse gas emissions, we're doing okay with energy, water. So tracking is really critical. Reporting to us is really critical. Reporting to the public. And Bill Blackburn, our former head, who's going to be speaking here, actually was really critical in sitting and helping create the global reporting initiative. This was to try to come up with a way that companies could report in a consistent way. So if I'm here, and I want to compare company A and company B, I don't have to wade through a lot of different kinds of information. This was the general idea. You want to bring some kind of consistency across the board so that people could really compare apples to apples. And so they come up with guidance on how that company should be reporting. And hopefully get away with from some of the greenwashing that a lot of companies do, where it's not real solid data that people will be able to use. So anyway, this is critical to our operations reporting. And once we do our report, which is here is our last report, and actually I brought some brochures if anyone would like. I'll leave them on the table here. Once we publish our results, Then we have many stakeholder meetings, and we get feedback. Some of the key feedback we get is from our Customer Sustainability Advisory Council. We took some of our largest customers, and we said, will you help give us feedback? So we asked them to review the report, ask them, are we concentrating on the right thing, are we not? And all these other folks, series or shareholders group that filed a resolution against us years ago. We've got auditors who audit our data, we go through and make sure it's correct, and an online survey. So if you happen to go in there, you have to say, why are they doing this? This is really goofy. Right there, you can give feedback to us, and we take all of that feedback very seriously in developing our next report. So really, this has been our approach, and we collect the data to measure our performance, identify our strengths and our gaps. If you don't have the data, you don't know where your gaps are, you don't know where your weaknesses are. We report the data, we get stakeholder feedback, both internal feedback and external feedback. We plan and work to address the gaps, and then that feeds back, and we continue to do this. And we have done this for many, many years. And it's what has really slowly driven our program to a higher level, I think. It's this continuous improvement process. So the results, let me just quickly show you a few highlights. I talked about what we expected to get. Here's what we're seeing. Okay, first, increased profitability. Okay, from our EHS program, you can see that alone, EHS-related activities. This is waste reduction, water reduction, energy reduction, safety, managing our cases better, getting people back on the floor better, reducing accidents, 14.1 million. This is actual money that goes back in somebody's budget. And we are actually well known for this environmental financial statement. And if you're interested in this, we actually met, or Bill Blackburn did years ago, with a financial accounting firm and said, we want discipline around this process that's similar to what this financial filing would be. So he sat down and he said, how do we account for all of these things? And they come up with a financial profit and loss statement, really. So, and you can see all the details online. You can go into the full document, but what we actually had was, these are the highlights, these are our costs. These are salary costs, for our people around the world, our pollution prevention equipment, and maintenance and all that, remediation, waste, and other response costs. And then the savings are in the green. One of the things is cost avoidance, because if we save energy, we put in a new, more efficient lighting system, for example, we'll continue to reap the benefits in the following years. We decided to cap it at 6 years, but when you continue to track it, which is real money, it's taken out of somebody's budget. We saw last year for our 2006, actually we're working on 2007 right now, we're almost done with it, but $52.7 million in savings. That's nothing to sneeze at. We see increased productivity from, this is our energy usage, which I showed you before. We're making more product for the same amount of energy, basically. And increased productivity from reducing our waste. This is where I just said we're struggling a little, so we're putting some more resources because we want to drive it down even further. But in general, these solid bars in different parts of the world, and this is all in our sustainability work, this is actual numbers. So this is actual metric tons of waste we generated in different regions of the world, and you can see that our footprint got smaller, but our production was going up. So we were doing really well for a while. That was really exciting to us, and that's when we started lean manufacturing some of these other things that was around here. We saw that direct results in our numbers. So more product, less waste means less cost. Same with water usage. We're relatively flat. We're making more product, though, so we're becoming more efficient. So productivity and profitability. We've also, from our program, realized some reputation and brand strength. It's kind of nice to be called one of the global 100 most sustainable corporations in the world. And we've been a medical products leader in the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. We're recognized by US EPA quite a bit. So we get a lot of nice recognition. And it's nice for our CEO to go get an award, and that, helps drive the program more. The investor appeal, like I said, being on the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, which is the most sustainable companies in the world, are screened by the Dow Jones Sustainability Index people. We are the medical products leader in that. So that, we're owned by many SRI funds, socially responsible index funds. And so that also helps with our financial performance. We've seen some results with reduced operational burden and interference. This was, US EPA has a program called Performance Track, and we were asked to be corporate leaders in Performance Track a couple of years ago. They've only chosen, that first year they chose 3 companies and came to our headquarters and grilled us for a week. They had a consultant come in, and they're asking us all kinds of questions. They said, we're going to choose you as a corporate leader. The next year they had 1 company, became a corporate leader, and last year they had none. But what they give the corporate leaders is they say, you guys are leaders, we're not worried about you. We know you're going to do the right thing. So we're going to allow a little flexibility in the permitting and other things. So maybe if you want to move this piece of equipment from here to here, we're going to do this thing with you called a flexible air permit, where you're not going to have to wait. You're not going to have to wait. You're going to go to the top of the list, and you're going to be able to do it even before we approve it, because we know you're going to do the right thing. This is a huge competitive advantage to us, because if somebody else is, they asked us. Remember, EPA said, what can we give you? Do you want less regulation? Do you want lower? They said, do you want more lenient standards that you would have to meet? And we said, are you kidding? No, because that would just, we want more stringent for our competitors because we're already going so far beyond the regulations. So you got to get tougher on our competitors and don't let them get away with, not doing as well. So they said, okay, that's interesting. We thought we were going to ask to be allowed to pollute. Now, it's going completely against what we believe in corporation. But we would like you to go after the bad guys, make it more difficult for them. So they thought that was very interesting. Another thing is just being able to construct, right, to operate in many parts of the world. We had a situation in California where when we were going to build our plant there, the community did not want it until they looked into our record, and they said they're going to be good corporate citizens. We don't have to worry about them. They're going to operate well. So they let us build our plant. So, and, driving innovation. This whole thing with sustainability makes us look at our products differently, makes us look at the life cycle of our products, and we come out with things. This new Aviva product uses green certified renewable electricity. It's not a PVC bag. And, directly from thinking about these issues, we've incented like in the island of Malta, we have the largest solar array on the island. And, that helps the local economy and helps drive things over there, but it made sense there because in Malta they have something like 268 sunny days. So it made perfect sense, business sense to do it there. Wind power, we're one of the top, recognized the EPA as one of the top 30 purchasers. And, it's funny because we've been trying to buy renewable energy for years, and our head of manufacturing would always say, it's going to cost me more now. He would always say, it's going to cost me more now. Green building is going to cost me more now. He's very firm on that. Now he's saying, I'll pay more if you'll do away with my spikes. So he's looking at it as a risk reduction, and it's really cool because he said his new CEO, he had to stand up in front of the new CEO, and this is the most powerful guy at Baxter, he's the head of manufacturing, and he had to get up there and say he didn't meet his budget for the first time because he got screwed on energy and water. and raw materials. Well, the water connected to the energy. So if we can level the costs, and one way to do that is look at more steady sources of power. So, green buildings and strategies around climate change. Some of you know we were one of the founding members of Chicago Climate Exchange in trading and carbon trading. One of my buddies at work is now, a stock trader in carbon credits. We had the first trade of overseas, actually, between the U.S. and Ireland. Anyway, this is all very interesting, but we're out of time. So basically, our focus and many other corporations now, all these reasons for sustainability, right? It's really become such a huge driver in business. Profitability and productivity and reputation and image, innovation, brand and transparency and increased corporate social responsible reporting, ability to attract and retain talent, social responsibility. So why sustainability? We've got investors, we've got NGOs or non-governmental organizations, we've got communities, we've got ethical reasons for doing it, it's the right thing, regulatory compliance, customers, bottom line value. That's why we do it. So, okay? So sorry, we don't have a whole lot of time for questions. I have as much time as anyone wants, but I know some of you have other things that you have to take, like classes probably, right? So, but I'm willing to stick around for a while if you have any questions.
Thank you, Jenni. Yeah, if anybody has to leave, they can feel free to go.
Yeah, I don't want to
Go ahead and answer some questions. I see Kishore back there.
When you run projects within the company for execution, what kind of financial guidance is given? Is it an internal rate of return or some payback? What would it be?
It's interesting to bring that up because that relates to what I was just saying about flattening the demand on energy or the cost of energy, because we do have an internal rate of return that projects need to match or meet, and so everybody's always fighting for capital. But our head of manufacturing has lowered the required rate of return, or raised it, I guess you would say, for anything that will reduce our energy use. So he's actually changed it for energy. So energy gets a special dispensation. We can actually spend more now.
Can you share an actual number, or is that?
Well, I think I'd have to look at what the most recent, but it's between 2 and 4, and it's like 2.5, and then you have, but he's going up quite high on the energy one.
Because many other corporations we talk to may have returns of 10%. It seems like the bar, even though the borrowing cost might actually be much lower, the internal bar would be much higher, and it never, to me, it seemed like it was kind of interesting. Dichotomy, how they view when it comes to these kind of projects, what kind of IRR they use, whereas if they go to borrow from the market, they pay a very different rate. So I wasn't sure how that works.
I don't know that much about the details of it because I'm not involved directly with most of it. But I do know that, some of my buddies at some of the plants that have been trying to get projects approved, they're getting pushed up. And so, and getting approval much quicker. I think it relates to, especially energy, but also water, because water for us is intimately connected with energy. We do a lot of steam, and we do a lot of purification of water. So if we can save water, it usually means a big energy cost too.
Have you also tried to take advantage? Let's assume you have a facility in the U.S. that is very resource, efficient, and you talked about the permitting advantage that you seem to have within at least the U.S. or within the U.S. Have you tried to take that and see if you can get the government of India or the government of China to give you the same breaks because you are already this efficient?
I have some interesting stories about, I've met with regulators in China, actually, and some interesting stories to share about that. It's funny. It's funny that the situation in China is very different from the U.S. And a lot of times, unfortunately, what we run into directly in China is, don't worry about that, because they're like, oh, Baxter can't meet that water standard. Don't worry about it because, we're not going to do anything about it. So, there's not a lot of enforcement horsepower, or, no, I shouldn't say that, because it's in pockets. Depends on who you're dealing with. But a lot of times, they're trying so hard to get American investment that they're willing to bend a lot of regulations. And in fact, one of our main challenges was even getting them to set effluent limits for us. Our plants wanted it because they have to know if they're meeting standards that are Baxter standards, and they kept trying to get a limit set, and the government wouldn't do it in one of the districts in China. So they asked me to meet with the government because they thought somebody from Corp, and he kept saying, don't worry about it. We set a limit. Maybe Baxter can't meet the limit. And I said, well, we need to know that then. And he said, well, we had an American company who set a limit. They couldn't meet the limit, and then we had to find them. And they were afraid that their American corporate people would be mad. So we wrote them a letter and said it was a license fee.
So they monitor the lead, the paint a little more.
Well, that's what's scary about it. They just have a different mindset right now. So what we try to do when we go in there is impose our standards. That's one thing I'm very proud of Baxter for. We impose the same standards across the world. And if your government doesn't require you to do things, you have to meet our policies, and you are audited our policies, and you have to. So, and we become the regulatory body when there is none. So, a lot of that, I think, is just being proactive. And there's a lot of American companies that are that way, too. Unfortunately, there's a lot that are not that way. And that's too bad.